identity, educational leadership, and leadership preparation. Our goal for this Connect series is to promote a consciously queer approach to educational leadership preparation. So let's meet our panelists. We have Jason, who we're still working on the audio, but we have Jason Dennis, and he's an assistant principal for instructional administration at Oak Park and River Forest High School, a large high school in a suburb just outside of Chicago. We have Catherine Lugg, and she's a professor at Rutgers University Graduate School of Education. He studies politics of education, queer issues in North America, and social and political history. We have Judy Alston. He's the and professor of the Department of Leadership Studies and Educational Administration at Ashland University. And her research foci include Black female school superintendents, the exploration of how intersections of class, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual diversity, and ability affect leaders, tempered radical servant leadership, and Black LGBT issues and educational leadership. And lastly, we have Jimmie Beall. She is a resource counselor in Columbus City schools. She supports the work of 130 counselors in grades K through 12 by providing professional development and trainings, grief support for the families in 115 schools, troubleshooting difficult situations, and serving as a consultant on a myriad of sensitive and difficult matters. Jimmie also works on behalf of the LGBTQ staff and students and is helping the district establish itself as a comprehensive LGBTQ inclusive educational organization. One fun fact, Jimmie also helped filed herself one of the few lawsuits in the nation in federal court to challenge sexual orientation discrimination based on the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So thank you all for being with us, and we want to get this conversation started off today by asking each of you to please describe your experience with queerness, whether it's something or someone who identifies as queer, the practices, if you practice queer conscious school leadership, or as someone who researches issues of queer leadership. That would be great to start off our conversation tonight. So, Dr. Lugg, would you mind starting us off?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I came out very late in life, in my late 20s, and I decided to tear up my life and go to grad school and come out at grad school, which is always kind of a crazy thing to do. I figured, make it real all the way around. And so I came out into Queer Nation. And so that and the Lesbian Avengers. So I'm probably the only former Lesbian Avenger teaching public school principals around. I hope for more, though. And so that's always informed my analysis from the get-go. And as I looked for theorists, it was trying to make the intellectual leap between queer theory, which is rooted in the humanities, and then traditional social science policy analysis, which really had nothing to say to me. And so I, tried to figure out what body of literature to use, and after years of fumbling around, I found the law review literature. Now, it's kind of problematic because nobody goes to court if they're happy. So it's kind of like a history of car crashes. But there are legal theorists, particularly Francisco Valdez and Daryl Hutchinson, who have really set the intellectual groundwork for queer legal theory, and these are queer men of color. And so it's really helped inform my analysis from the get-go. Also, queer legal theory is an intellectual descendant, well, you guys know this, of critical race theory, critical theory, and feminist legal theory. And so it just helps me really kind of open up policy analysis. So it's never just about the policy itself. It's also about race. It's also about class. It's about gender. It's about sexual orientation. It's all there, and how you peel the onion really depends on the particularities of that policy and how that policy is understood or not understood. So right now I'm trying to do a update Hannah Arendt's work for queer theory. We'll see if anything comes of it, but that's like do-it-yourself dental surgery. You don't want to try to do this without tenure.
Gotcha.
Uh,
Dr. Alston, you want to jump in?
sure. What you don't know is that Catherine and I are sisters, and we have known each other for over 20 years.
Uh,
We went through our doctoral programs together at Penn State.
oh,
So yeah. So the stuff that she says, I just laugh because I've heard it, and I expect it to happen this way. Um, so this whole notion of queerness, I've just in the last probably maybe the last 8 years started to embrace the word queer. I never cared for it before, but it seems to. I think it's about a maturing process too. So it seems to really identify for me who I am on this spectrum of personhood, of peopleness, of who I am in the world. I came out. I don't. That's a real good question. When did you really come out? Always known that I was a lesbian. That wasn't an issue, at least in my mind. But in terms of really being out, I probably formally came out to my parents when I was 36 years old, and that was after graduate school. But at that point, for me, it was as long as my mother and father know and are okay with it, I don't really care about anybody else. And it was also at that point where I knew that I was wanting to be in a committed relationship with this one person. And so my wife of almost 15 years now still has to put up with me, right? But the whole idea about queerness in research, it's just who I am, therefore it is what I do. It is I can't divorce those pieces of myself, being black, being female, being queer. I can't, none of those things, the axes of my identity. I wrote about this in a chapter a few years ago. It was called An Ethic of Responsibility, something about a black female scholar ponders the intersections of racism, heterosexism, and something else. You forget titles after a while. Ask me the title of my dissertation, have no idea. So it was about being authentic in not only in academia, but all the time. Not just in my regular world and people who know me and see me, but in all the spaces of my life. That I embrace who I am, and therefore that's when I started to really embrace this notion of being queer. I just thought it was, to me it meant weird, and I said, well, I'm not weird. Well, I'm different, yet lovable, but just who I am. But it started to make sense to me, especially as I talked about in my research about being authentic, and understanding what that meant in my personal and in my professional spaces. So that's how I've gotten to that space of embracing that. And then, truthfully, this younger generation, that is the nomenclature for them. And so for me to have real authentic conversations with them, I need to be in the lingo with them. I can't walk around, saying groovy and cool all the time, even though those are words that Kath and Jimmie and I get, right?
Yeah.
But I also have to embrace queer if I want to really have an honest, authentic conversation with this younger generation.
And that's particularly interesting as I have been thinking about facilitating this conversation and not really knowing the origins of queer and where it came from and who's embracing it and who's not. And you're saying sort of that it's generational.
Yeah, I see it as such. I had an experience probably 16 or 17 years ago. I was in New York City and actually wrote about this in that book chapter. I was with an ex, and we were on the way to go to lunch at at a nice soul food restaurant in Manhattan. And I'm walking down the street with my ex-girlfriend, and a homeless guy says, can you give me $1? Can you give me some change? And honestly, when I'm in the city, I don't carry cash. That is, so when I said I don't have any money, that was the honest to God truth. If I had, I would have given him something. But as I was walking away, and I, apologized, and I don't have any cash, and we're going to B. Smith's actually, and so we're walking. Just as my foot hits the sidewalk to go into the restaurant, dude yells out, "You're just a bulldagger."
Hmm.
Now that word. Now, if you want to start a fight with me for real, call me that.
Hmm.
I mean, there are a couple other words too, but that one, that got me. So I had to really think about, why does that really eat at me? And then I put that up against queer, and I thought, well, queer, that makes more sense to me. Bulldagger, let's not get into the history of that word. Let's not go backwards with that. I mean, that to me, that really, if you want to put a dagger in me, then you go with that one. And so the whole piece around the homeless guy, and I was thinking later on, well, if I had given you money, would you have said, "God bless you, bulldagger," or just "God bless you," right?
Right.
So yeah, so this whole idea about language and generations and what and meanings, it has a whole lot of importance in the work that we do.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, Ramon, because I'm a practitioner, and so I think some of my experiences are a little bit different. I think academics probably lead the pack when it comes to being able to implement language that aligns well with theory and that creates the opportunity for change.
Hmm.
Those of us in the field are probably a little bit behind that because while I can embrace queer and use it in writing, for the most part, if I use queer as language in the workplace,
Right.
it's not there. I'm going to get a lot of pushback,
Hmm.
and there'll be a lot of people who. Now, I can. There are groups of people I can use queer with, as far as language goes, but because of the diversity of stakeholders that we serve and the diversity of people and experiences they bring in a public school setting, it's very difficult to use a word that's rather cutting edge. People are it's old school in a lot of ways, and yet because there's a lot of baggage, if you will, that goes with certain words, a lot of hurt, a lot of oppression that has been associated with certain words, people are a little reticent to embrace it. And because of that, I'm adjusting my language depending on who I'm talking to continually.
Hmm.
Now, what I do is always have kind of a critical lens and stance. So to challenge people to think about the categories and how they're constructed and why we feel the need to label people and what happens when we do, what are the unintended or intended consequences of labels and categories, and challenge them to think along the lines of equity and access all the time. Who's being left out? Who's being marginalized? Who's being oppressed as we use language? And it's, to me, it's fascinating because it is very much cultural and generational. I work with a lot of age groups and cultural groups, and they each use and embrace different words to explain their own identity. But, depending on who I'm talking with, I'll adjust in order to meet them where they're at. and then use this idea of always critically thinking and analyzing to kind of pull us into the same place.
Thank you so much. I was going to ask, particularly around Dr. Alston, and maybe others may have something to state about this. When you mentioned the coming out process and how it was so late in life, and when you think about parents, I remember you saying a few seconds ago that as long as your parents were okay with it,
Yeah.
you were going to be okay. And just thinking about the work that Jimmie does, how many times are you experiencing that as a counselor, the grief, obviously that's described in your profile, of students who don't have the support of their parents, and what administration at schools doing? And that's a question particularly for you, Jimmie, but also thinking about what we can do as educators in higher education to sort of bridge that gap and provide frameworks for professional development for educational administration teams to sort of work around this issue, so that we're making sure that we're serving all of our populations with their sensitive intersectionalities well. So what have you seen, Jimmie, in terms of professional development, and what type of things is your district doing to combat some of those issues?
Well, one of the first places we looked, and both Dr. Alston and Dr. Lugg this is kind of the direction I've seen in the writings they've done, and that's around policy, because as you have a foundation, you really have a place from which you can start to move practice and put in place procedures and environments that support those policies. So those are pretty critical, and we have been diligent, especially this past year, to go through every single policy and make sure that those policies are inclusive and not just non-discriminatory. And there's a nuanced difference there, but it's a huge one when it comes to enacting then whatever comes forward from that policy.
Jimmie, I've got a question, if I can butt in here. Has your school district started to revise policy in light of Obergefell?
Yes, actually, we prior to that Supreme Court ruling, we had worked to get in place partner benefits, and the litmus test, if you will, was that you had to be registered somewhere. And in Ohio, all we had were registries. So Cleveland Heights had a registry, and then eventually Columbus had a registry. You had to be registered somewhere, and then you could get partner benefits. Almost immediately after that, partner benefits were extended to everyone, but you had to get married within 30 days in order to have those benefits, or you were going to lose what you had up to that point. And I got a lot of frantic phone calls like, I'm going to get married in 30 days. So because, you're planning weddings, but you're not planning them based on Supreme Court rulings.
Okay. A deeper policy question, though. So that's personnel policy. How about student policies? How about curricula when you talk about marriage, talk about history of folks? I mean, yes and no, I would say. We're still working on it. One of the things I did was put together a comprehensive approach. So it would include facilities, it would include extracurricular activities, it would include athletics, it would include textbooks, which fell under curriculum, but also resources. It would include library holdings within the district and within each building. So if we were going to be comprehensive in our approach, what are all the areas that would need to be examined? And that's a slow process. And what usually happens is we are working on something when someone else will give a phone call and say, did you know that our sociology book says that marriage is between one man and one woman? No, I didn't know that. So, because
there aren't enough hours in a day to start analyzing every single facet of a huge organization. But that's the goal. The goal is that, you know, we move that direction, and as we've come across pieces, we've been able to address them immediately, and in the meantime, we're being very diligent to address every piece that we can to encompass it all.
That's great.
Dr. Alston, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I was just thinking because both Jimmie and I live here in Columbus, but she's talking about at that, you know, very K-12 level. I'm thinking about, and Catherine can chime in here, you know, what do we do as those who prepare educational leaders, and what are we doing at our level of in the academy, you know, as we look at our as we look at our Masters of Ed Admin and Ed Leadership programs, as we look at our doctoral programs in Ed Leadership, or in my case, Leadership Studies, you know, what specific courses are covering the issues? How are we bringing them forth? I'm teaching a Masters of Ed class this semester, and it's the Ed Leadership course. And I bring that in because I want to be very intentional about discussing these issues, and what I think that future assistant principals and future principals need to know, and even those the teacher leaders in the classroom. These are the issues that we need to be dealing with. But you know, how do we get that into the policy for? You know, is it in our ISLIC standards, you know, or whatever other standards that whatever other standards that we're using, because we have to hit it from all angles, so that people actually recognize the importance of all of this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've been teaching basically intersectionality and diversity focus as all of that evolves, almost from the day I walked in the door. And I started teaching about queer issues in my Politics of Ed classes in, 1998. And so I had a piece that came out in Ed Policy, and I put it into my Politics of Ed class and handed it out one week. They were going to read it the next week. And the Monday before I taught it, on Tuesday, Matt Shepard died.
Yeah.
And it just hit everyone between the eyeballs. And this is when, at Rutgers, I was the only person in the School of Education teaching this stuff.
Yeah.
But I made a commitment to start teaching it early in my career, and I just, now it's like, if they're taking a course with Lugg and they have to take 2 or 3, they're going to be talking about this stuff and thinking about it and trying to puzzle through.
And I want to remind folks who are viewing online to not to forget to hit us up on Division A Connect on Twitter and in the YouTube boxes to send questions to the panelists. And Dr. Lugg, as I'm listening to you speak, and Dr. Alston as well, when you talked about how can we prepare leaders comprehensively in masters and doc programs, I'm thinking about how this work is supported, because I can imagine that in graduate schools of education nationally there aren't that many folks that are doing this work, but the folks that are doing this work, I'm thinking about what type of pushback they're getting from the dean or the provost, who are supporting these issues or not supporting these issues, because Jimmie, you brought this up a minute ago when you said there are pushbacks around the terminology that's used. And so actually getting these policies implemented, what does that pushback look like? And on both levels, if you all can speak to that, and what needs to be done to sort of push this conversation forward.
Look for allies. Always look for friends. Always, always, always. Don't try to be a lone ranger on any of this.
Yeah, that I would agree. It's because for those of us who are in the academy, we can find those who are allies, both those who are queer and those who are not. And we form some coalitions there and try to get some work done. But believe you me, there is infighting and there's hard work in the academy as well, because there's pushback at some very high levels. And so we're also dealing with an area, a discipline, I should say, educational administration, for example, that, historically it's been a bunch of old white men. And so we still have a few of those old white men in our ranks, and to get them to change and embrace, or to be inclusive, has been difficult. And we've been doing this now 20 some odd years, Catherine and I. And I mean, we've seen some change. So I don't want people to think that there's no change. We've seen change, but number one, at what cost? Because both of us have dealt with issues of cost in terms of moving through the ranks, as from assistant to now both of us being full. But we've had to deal with cost. And so you ask yourself, or as Linda Warner used to ask us at Penn State, is this the hill on which I wish to die? And if I say that this is my life's work, and this is the research that I'm going to do because I'm going to be real and I'm going to be authentic about it, then yeah, this is the hill on which I wish to die. But everybody, you have to ask that for yourself. And for some people, they can't take the loss.
And the pushback, I mean, just two quick points that happened to me, and they happened in quick succession. I got shut down on tenure when I went up in 2002 on the strength of one external letter that was later ruled homophobic. And so it took 2 years of my life to get that sorted out. At the same time, I was working on this crazy piece for EAQ called Sissy Spaghett's, Lesbies, and Dykes.
Yeah.
Be subtle.
Yeah.
And, when I first presented it at UCEA, a senior scholar at that time afterwards cornered me and accused me of promoting pedophilia.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when Judy says we've, taken our licks professionally for what we do, she's absolutely right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and to piggyback on that, the fast fact that you mentioned earlier about the lawsuit came as a result of me being fired from a public school when I worked in a high school because they thought I might be gay.
Right.
They thought I might be gay. And I was fired, and I had stellar evaluations and all that, which helped in the long run with the lawsuit, but it still was, a painful process because the only remedy was to file a lawsuit.
Yeah.
That was it. I mean, and it's kind of ironic that at this point we have marriage equality across the nation, but we still don't have workplace protection that are delineated at any level, including the federal level. So, people are really cognizant of the fact that when these things, any pushback from being on the front lines can have a huge cost.
Yeah.
And it makes people just a little nervous.
I really want to point this out before I get to this question, just to put some things into context. Thank you guys so much for sharing as passionately as you are. We have a question from Jennifer Jones, but I want to provide some context on this understanding of a queer and queerness. A quote from Professor Somerville, and she describes queer as the following: in both popular and academic usage in the United States, queer is sometimes used interchangeably with the terms gay and lesbian, or occasionally transgender and bisexual. In this sense, is it understood as an umbrella term that refers to a range of sexual identities that are not straight. But in some political and theoretical contexts, queer is used in a seemingly contradictory way as a term that calls into question stability of any categories of identity based on sexual orientation. In the second sense, queer is a critique of the tendency to organize political and theoretical questions around sexual orientation. So to queer becomes a way to denaturalize categories such as lesbian and gay, not to mention straight and heterosexual, but revealing them as socially and historically constructed identities that have often worked to establish and police the line between normal and the abnormal. So the question from Jennifer Jones, and I know you guys mentioned this a little bit earlier in terms of how you positioned yourself, and she quotes that both Catherine and Judy shared that they came out as young adults. She said that she's tried to inform her thinking around an identity of queer for younger people. That word has damaging connotations like the N word, right? And childhood can be horrible enough in many other ways. Can you share your thoughts about increasing the understanding of the term queer?
Okay, I'll tell a personal story. My wife is 16 years older than I am, and came out into lesbian liberation. She's a social worker. We have had an ongoing gentle argument over my terminology. She's okay now with me using queer, but it's taken about 17 years because because it's taken that long to really have her understand that when I'm using it, both theoretically, I'm really using it politically as inclusive, because gay always gets troped into meaning gay white men of a certain class.
Right, right.
Lesbian does too. If you're an academic lesbian, I'm the daughter of a butcher. I don't think I'm going to fit. So what I liked about queer in the queer theory sense is it was so radically inclusive, and that I had to question my own whiteness to embrace that kind of inclusive power that it can have. It's also theoretically very volatile.
Yeah.
So Jason Murphy and I have a piece out in QSE about calling for queering educational policy.
Yeah.
And making sure that it's thoroughly queered, damn it.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, kind of in K-12 arenas that I'm in, it takes time and a lot of education to help people understand it from those perspectives.
Yeah.
I'm a counselor, so I had a group of students in my office one day, some female students, and I was checking some transcripts and stuff for them. So I was working on a computer, and they were behind me talking, and of course I'm like listening the whole time because that's where you learn stuff. So the girls were talking about some girl that they had known in middle school, and they're like, "Have you seen her lately? Oh my gosh, she's so different." Now, mind you, that when I talk about my students, even though I'm white, most of my kids are kids of color. Mm-hmm. So, and it's interesting because we've had lots of conversations, and in lots of contexts, they say, "But we don't see you as white," which I think is a great thing. That's a great thing because it brings down some barriers. Mm-hmm. But anyway, they were behind me, and they were talking about this girl, and as soon as they said, "She's so different now," my ears perked up, and I'm thinking, yeah, I bet she's come out, or she started to embrace who she is. And so somebody said, yeah, like she dresses different, and she talks different, and she acts different. And somebody else said, so is she gay? And the student said, no, I wouldn't say she's gay. I mean, I like her. She's a friend of mine. And immediately I thought, well, that's interesting that she's not going to identify this girl as gay, because that somehow has a negative connotation in her mind because she's a friend of hers. But she said, but I'll tell you, she's a girl lover. Oh, that's an interesting choice of words. So, kids, and I enjoy listening to them because most of my kids will say they'll identify as studs, as boys, as femmes, as post-label, a whole bunch of words that aren't queer and are queer. And then when I'm talking to parents, like I had a poster to hang up, and the dance locally was Happy New Queer. And the schools didn't want to hang it up because they felt like queer was a derogatory term.
Did you say
And
happy
that
new
was,
queer?
pardon me?
Did you say happy new queer?
Yes.
Oh wow,
It's
I've never heard of that before.
a happy new queer dance.
Wow.
And there was a lot of pushback about hanging up this flyer for this dance because they saw queer as very derogatory. So it's just, and when I've had conversations with parents, I have queer parents who say, queer parents of color who say, I would never identify as queer because I grew up with that and I know what that meant then. And they'll say, now I'll say I'm on the down low, or I'll identify as in the life, or I'll identify as whatever it is.
Yeah.
But they're not going to use that term for themselves. So I try the best I can to educate others to letting people self-name and being sensitive to that, while keeping in mind what do we do when we label people and build categories and expect people to fit in them.
Yeah. Jimmie, you hit the proverbial nail on the head with that. Queer has been a pejorative term for so long, and so now you have a generation of people who are embracing it and redefining it and using it in a way that or they're reclaiming it for themselves in a positive way. It becomes, as Catherine says, an inclusive term. And it's a political term. It's also a term that can start a fire, but it's also a term that can start an embrace. It's almost it's utilitarian in many ways. So it depends on where you are geographically. It depends on where you are in your thoughts, in growing. Where you are in your age, in your wisdom, where you are in terms of your work. I'm also a seminarian. This is, praise God, my last semester in seminary. I'm finishing up this Master's of Divinity because I can't get enough education, apparently. But even in that space, you have queer theology, and you talk about being a politicized term there, and pushing people to the edge. I always say I like to push people to the edge of it. But I'm the learning edge. But I'm not going to let you fall off the cliff, right? We want to get people to a place where we can have a conversation where we can really understand each other. And I'm not trying to judge you on what you're saying. I just want to understand what you're talking about. So for me, for the longest, I hated the term lesbian. I just didn't like the way the word sounded. And so if you call me that, bulldagger, lesbian, woo, no, I don't like either one of those. I just happen to love women. That's how I was born, and that's how I'm going to be. But as I said, coming to a place now, 50 and going on, be post 50, Catherine, embracing that term and being intentional. I've been really talking a lot with some colleagues lately. We were talking about social justice and how people have taken that term and done all kinds of craziness with it. And they do the same thing with queer theory and critical race theory. And you get it and you decide what you want to do with it. And if you're in the majority, then you get to be heard, right?
Yeah.
So now I'm adding this word intentional. So how are we being intentional in our conversations, right? How are we being intentional with these discussions about social justice? How are we being intentional when we talk about queer? What do we mean? Am I trying to offend, or am I trying to educate? Am I trying to embrace? Am I trying to understand?
I tend to take two paths. And that's probably because I'm more vociferous, I think, in my anger at times.
You think?
And so I'm not afraid of taking a rhetorical 2x4 to someone's head.
Right.
You can't have articles called "Thinking About Sodomy" and not.
True, and there are so many people who've not recovered from that rhetorical 2x4 that you have given them.
I know.
Hmm.
And I think there's really a place for all of those elements because kids can relate, certain terms resonate,
Right.
and and it's just like you said, as they mature, as they grow in self-acceptance, and some of it, let's be real, is very much about safety issues.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yes.
about,
Yes.
am I going to have a home to live in tonight, or am I going to
Yes.
be calling somebody in the night because I don't have a place to go?
Yeah.
So when we talk about those kinds of very real situations, I mean, I've had kids thrown through plate glass windows and all kinds of stuff when family found out they're gay. So, the kids are like, they'll use language to navigate their environment and to subvert some of the system because they're in places where it's all they've got. They don't have the power that comes with being old enough to vote or independent financially or any of those other things. So what have they got? They've got language.
Yeah.
Well,
They've got presentation. They've got, so they use that.
Well, and this is from my book, but I argue in the book that just came out that unlike the adults, there's a real culture conf being waged currently against queer youth. They don't vote, can't vote because you're under 18.
Absolutely.
And there's all these really hateful the queer adults, we can fight back at the at the ballot box, we can organize, but queer youth are really disenfranchised in a lot of locales. And so they become the political targets of some political groups. I mean, it's really quite horrifying. And then you mix in bias of race and gender, and you start seeing lots of really crazy shit happening, pardon my language, in like Tennessee.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, some of the work that you guys can do is really about helping people who haven't yet hit the fields understand what's going on out there and understand ways they can, if you bring about change on a myriad of levels. So you can do it, at a grassroots level. You can do it at a political level. You can do it at a social level by ensuring that students have a place to meet and have each other and have support. And so I think helping them really see what's going on. And that's the reason I try to go in and share, like at the colleges and universities around here, some of what we see all the time with queer youth.
And Jimmie, you were talking about specifically with your comments right there. You were talking about in graduate schools of education, right?
Yes.
Preparation.
Yeah.
And leadership. Yeah, absolutely. And counseling. I mean, social work, all of them. Whoever's going to wind up as a practitioner in the school system.
Right. So and that's it. And for me, you've named those spaces and places where that we can address issues. But I would add, and this is the piece that I've really been working on lately, the personal level. So I'm calling this leadership as soul work. Dealing with myself, because we have these folks who are in our classes who aren't in touch with themselves, right?
Absolutely.
And so in order to really be an effective leader, I need to know me. And so there's some real personal work that I have to do, and and that's scary. That's real scary for people. When I say to my students, I need you to really look in the mirror at yourself.
Yes.
Who are you, and what are you bringing to this table?
Yep.
Right.
And so, in that piece about leadership as soul work, and I talk about this about Foucault's notion of parrhesia or truth telling.
Yes.
truth telling to yourself. Foucault talks about parrhesia being having like 5 essential pieces. So you have to be frank with yourself. This frankness, you have to tell the truth. There's a level of danger with this,
Of course.
because you talk about being open outside of yourself, but how about being open to self? Which is a whole other conversation, and this whole piece about being critical, not criticizing, but being critical. And then this whole piece about duty. I owe myself this. I owe this to me. I owe the truth to me. And so when you can get to this soul work, as we call it, as a student, Phil Bostic, he's at Wisconsin, doctoral student. He and I were working on a piece last year, and we'll continue to do this work about soul work, because you're taking your entire self into these places and spaces where there are children, and so you need to know the stuff that you have. You need to know how to deal with your own stuff before you can go in there telling somebody else what to do, how to do it. And so, that's the tough part. And it's even tougher to try to teach it at the graduate level, because there are no other places that people necessarily get it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I want to follow up on what Judy said, because it's funny. You're reading theology right now, and I'm reading a lot of philosophy.
Yeah.
And I want to follow up with it, because Arendt talks about the internal dialogue that you constantly have, thinking and reflecting and thinking and reflecting, and based on Socrates, that the worst thing about lying is that then you're a liar and you have to live and talk with a liar under your own roof.
Yeah.
And that's why the 7 deadly sins are so toxic, because they are toxic to your sense of being.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what we see is people who are not there, and as a result aren't authentic, and come into a classroom and they're queer and they can't embrace it, and so students have one of the most amazing aspects of the work I've done is just being real. That's it.
Yeah.
Just being real. Yeah. Like when my partner and I got married, and it hit the front pages, when we went down and got a marriage license, we had so many kids who were just thrilled to find out there was an adult that they knew in their school who was gay, who was queer, who said, this is who I am. And it was a first for them. So for us, that was like, it was amazing, and at the same time, so simple. What do you have to be? Authentic.
That's so powerful, and I just want to chime in really quickly here. I always let incoming graduate students know that I am put forth to sort of mentor. This is just a joke that your graduate school admissions letter should come with a referral to therapy, right? And so
Amen.
Just call my wife.
Really understanding, who you are as a person and all of the sensitive intersectionalities that you bring to the table. You guys have spoke so passionately on this, and it's really hitting me hard as I'm thinking about some of this stuff and just how we can push the narrative forward. But as we only have a few minutes left, I really want to focus on a few particular questions here, and then I'll ask you guys for some main takeaways. With all of the workplace violence, with all of the bullying and these isolated incidents that are continuously happening around the United States, about LGBTQ issues and individuals coming out and really embracing who they are, what would you like to tell students who may not feel comfortable in educational spaces right now, or what would you give advice to individuals who are now watching this broadcast and who will watch this broadcast about what they can do to push this narrative forward at their schools and becoming a lot more comfortable with who they are?
I would say for the adults who are responsible for the care and educating of children, you don't get allowed to be comfortable.
Mm.
particularly around queer stuff. If your school is phobic and you're comfortable with that, no, I want you to be deeply uncomfortable with that.
Yeah.
I don't want you to be complacent, and I want you to take on the burden of fixing it, regardless of your own identity. You know, take what you know of your identity to make the school a better, safer place for all kids, particularly for queer kids who, you know, don't have the numbers to fight back. And there's a real culture comp going on. And I think a lot of the measures, to be quite honest, are half-assed. So, you know, the It Gets Better campaign makes me want to pull what little hair I have out.
Yeah.
Why? Because you're telling the kids, wait until you graduate from high school and then it'll get better.
Right.
Well, that's a hell of a thing to tell a 12-year-old.
Wow.
Yeah,
No, it's got to be better now.
that's right.
Yeah. You know, I say that oftentimes, especially for those who identify as Christians, a lot of times the only Bible that a person will ever read is by watching you, if you say that you are this Christian. So if I say that I am a Christian and that I am authentic and that I am walking in truth, then I have to walk in my own truth.
Yep.
And I have to be real about that. And I have to be that example because that's my responsibility. That's my responsibility as a human on this planet. I really do believe in this ethic of responsibility. I am because of somebody else. You know, that's the African concept of Ubuntu. You know, I am because you are. And so I'm not going to live forever. I mean, I figure I got till I'm about 114. That's what I've got. But in these 114 years, I want to walk in such a way that it shines a light so that others can follow. And I think that's everybody's responsibility. Now, you may not plug into that responsibility until later in life, but at some point you have got to say, you know what, why am I here? Why am I living? Because it's not just about me. You know, we sit around and navel gaze all the time, but it's not just about me. And if we are in education, in particular, we're looking at our generation. I want to retire at some point and want to see the next generation move forward. And I want to feel comfortable in their arms. And in order for me to feel comfortable in their arms, I have to have lived my life in such a way that they are going to live their lives authentically. And so that is what I'm trying to teach. That's what I'm trying. When I say I'm real, trust and believe. I am real. I am real in the classroom. I'm real in the pulpit. I'm real on Facebook. I'm real at the bar. I'm the same person in all those spaces. And that's what I'm trying to get people, particularly my students, to understand and start to walk in their realness, in their authenticity.
And I would say with what both of Dr. Lugg and Dr. Alston said when it comes to students, and that is, one, build coalitions. There are students around you, there are adults around you. All it takes is one other person. You partner with that one other person. You be real with that one other person. You imagine and envision change with that one other person. That's powerful. Two, can affect huge change.
Yeah.
So just to begin to look around you for people that you can gravitate towards and who also embrace this idea that we should have equity and access for all people, that we don't want to marginalize or oppress anyone, even inadvertently. In counseling, we operate with basically two theoretical underpinnings. One is do good, and the other is, if you can't do good, do no harm. And I think those are our only choices. we can't do harm, but we should do good. And I think encouraging kids to do what they know is right, to be true to themselves, like Dr. Alston said, look inside, be honest, and speak truth to yourself, and that comes out around you. And I've seen a lot of kids, even individually, bring about great change because they didn't want injustice, because they wanted everyone to have access and equity and equality around them. And I've seen very young kids affect great change just by looking inside and speaking truth.
Yeah,
You can't argue it. You can't deny it.
yeah, yeah. This has been powerful. I wish we could have gotten Jason Dennis's audio on so he could chime in on some of this stuff. But I'm so happy, that he's stuck with us throughout this program. Lastly, we can just get a few takeaways from tonight from each of you. It can be a program, a strategy, a tactic, some must-have readings for queer leadership preparation, professional development, just some tools for folks to take away from tonight. This has been amazing.
I'll start. I would say one of the most powerful books that I've read in my life has been Parker Palmer's Let Your Life Speak. 2000, I think it was 2000 work. It's Let Your Life Speak, listening to the voice of vocation. And I think as an educator, it's a must read, but I just think as a human being, it's a must read. And it just aligns with what I just said about being authentic. It also aligns with the gospel of Saint Luke, really. See, Kathy, I have been paying attention at seminary. But when we talk about to whom much is given, much is required, each of us has been given much. Each of us as a human being, whether you count it in monetary wealth or just beyond that, we have been given life. We have been given a breath every day. And so what are you doing with your breath every day? To whom much is given, much is required. It's this ethic of responsibility. I have to let my life speak. I have to let my soul walk. I have to do what I am purposed to do here. And I know what I'm here to do. I'm here to teach. I'm here to preach. I'm here to walk in authenticity because somebody else is watching. And so I let my life speak. The mistakes that I've made, the trials, the tribulations, all of those things speak. And I keep moving because somebody is coming behind me and somebody is always watching.
A major takeaway from Dr. Lugg, Jimmie, for tonight?
Be a sister. So we have these ongoing discussions. But going back to Arendt and Socrates, it's important to live with honor.
Absolutely.
The ancients would say that's the only thing we have. And it is far better to die with honor than to live with dishonor.
Absolutely.
Lying, allowing people to be bullied, victimized, harassed, demeaned, is dishonorable. It is ultimately without honor, without standing within a community. You cannot build a community on dishonor.
No.
But you can build amazing communities of trust if you have honor. And so it's really important that I pursue an honorable, in a very Socratic way, life. And that informs a lot of what I do. I read a lot of queer history, so I would actually encourage people to watch the documentaries before Stonewall and after Stonewall. Before Stonewall, because to realize that there was a lot going on in the 20s and the turn of the century, and it wasn't, queer history didn't start in 1969, and there were, just awesomely brave men and women, not only in this country but around the world, speaking their truths and encouraging all of us to understand that history, and so we can all live honorable lives. And see, I'm an atheist. I think this is our only shot, and if I have an honorable life, that's as good as it gets.
Yeah.
When I'm pushing up daisies, and I'm sure Judy will be around to decorate my tombstone.
Right.
I want to be remembered as someone who is honorable. That's all.
Thank you, Dr. Lugg. Lastly, Jimmie?
Yes, thank you. And I want to really thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to even be here, because every day this work for me is about kids. Every day I'm in schools, every day I'm seeing their faces, every day hearing their stories. And what I would encourage people is that this isn't, while we can have these wonderful dialogues or contentious debates or academic discussion, the key is that this really is about people, and it's really about students when we're talking education. All very young kids, I get phone calls from kindergarten teachers asking me about kids who are gender creative or gender queer or gender bender or whatever you want it, but they have a sincere desire to meet a kid where he or she or they are at. And I think it's important always to keep at the forefront that whether we talk about political or social or economic, it's really about people, and it's about our students. And Dr. Alston, you're right, it's about our future. They're our future, and we have to really make that path straight for them by creating a place where they can become their best. And they'll carry forward more, but we have a responsibility, and there's a lot of work to do. We have kids who die every day. I did grief support in a building this morning for a senior who died today. We have kids all the time who encounter violence, who on a number of levels, for what? Identity. So there's always work to be done, and if people aren't sure where to look, seek out the nearest school and volunteer and build relationships and show compassion and feed and clothe and support in whatever way you can. And I think as long as there's work to do, we just need to be about doing it.
Amen.
And thank you so much, Jimmie. Thank you all. We just heard, ladies and gentlemen, who are viewing, three. I wish we could have got Jason Dennis on. We can maybe invite him to another one of our sessions. But three powerful leaders who are doing magnificent work in just a robust and very comprehensive manner. And we thank them so much for joining us tonight and allowing us to experience how they're tackling these critical issues as it relates to queer leadership in educating diverse populations with, again, all of their sensitive intersectionalities, especially LGBTQ communities. We really do commend and sincerely appreciate your efforts. And if I could just utter some of the words that I heard tonight, some that really stuck with me, look in the mirror, right? This idea of soul work. Be authentic, be real. Adults in K-12 schools and also in higher education. You don't have the right to be comfortable, right?
Right.
So begin building coalitions. What are you doing with the voice that you have? this idea of servant leadership, right? Do good, and if you aren't doing good, do no harm, right? Live with honor. Um, and I just have to say, if you don't feel compelled, I feel so honored to be able to have been able to facilitate this conversation. You guys have really inspired me in my own work as I'm thinking about this. But if you don't feel compelled to get up, get out, and get something after this conversation, we may need to check your pulse. Like,
Great.
these panelists have really provided significant fodder for this conversation to not die after you press the link to watch it and it ends. This should continue to occur. And so I want to thank you guys again from the AERA Division A GSC, and for our panelists and viewers as well. Please save the dates for future productions. As we sign off, we will have a live broadcast of the AERA Fireside Chat between April 7th and 10th on politics and power and community policing in schooling. More info to come on that. But we also have our last.
Ooh.
Yeah, we also
Yeah.
have our last. Please join us also in DC. I look forward to meeting you guys if you'll be there.
Yeah.
Please join us for our last Connect Series event of the year on Monday, May the 9th, 2016 at 7 o'clock Central, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on Remembering Rural Schools. And so that's also going to be another significant production. Again, we really, really thank you guys from the bottom of our hearts. It's been awesome to be able to speak with you guys tonight.
Thank you.
Mayor, thank you.
Very much.
Yep. Have
Lots of love to you all.
See you soon, Catherine. You too, Jimmie.
Thank you very much.
All right.
All righty, guys.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks again.
Peace.
Good night. Peace.